Hi, Kyle. Welcome to the show. I am so excited that you are here with us today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on, Vanessa.
It's absolutely a pleasure. I know we were talking off air, and it's sort of just sort of a funny connection in the beginning when we first met up because we have a mutual friend, Matt Blackburn. You were on his show, and so when you connected with me, you didn't even know that I already knew who you were. So it was just so amazing. I love how like we were talking about earlier, just how small of a world it is, and it's really an honor to have you.
Sure. Well, the honor's all mine. So
Yeah, thank
let's
you.
dive in.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very excited to dig into all of this. As you know, I was telling you, there's just so much here, and you have so much wisdom in this area of health. And so, oh, I just can't wait for people to hear what you have to say. Let's do this. Let's start out with your background. I feel like your background, your story, and sort of the trial that you have had in the past is such an important piece of this because it really ties into your line of work now. So, why don't you give us a little bit of a snapshot of what you walked through personally?
Sure. Yeah. So, I always felt kind of anxious, dissociated, kind of brain foggy, kind of like I really couldn't will my body to do the kind of things I wanted it to do. So it's like my body can never really keep up with my mind, I suppose. And that was most of my life. So I always felt like I was stuck in a lower gear, or like I couldn't really access, I guess, the full output that I could bring into this planet. And that always created a feeling of frustration that I couldn't quite understand why. And then around the age of 18, um, I had an emotional stress that was the straw that broke the camel's back, which caused all sorts of symptoms to manifest essentially overnight. Short list of it. I mean, oh my God, there's dozens of them, but I all of a sudden had constipation that had me pooping once a week. I had just like evil smelling gas. Anyway, lots of stuff like that, right? I couldn't tolerate any foods because of that. Everything just made me feel worse. My brain fog actually got so bad that I couldn't even have a conversation with people. So I would forget the last sentence that was just being spoken, or that weird feeling where I couldn't even remember the name of good friends. I'm talking to them. I'm like, well, why can't I recall the name of a person I've known for so long? So very weird situation that actually got scary to be able to drive or to do even basic tasks just felt absolutely overwhelming. So I felt like I was getting like electrocuted 24/7 with the anxiety the panic attacks, yeah, and the feeling like nothing was real. Like I was just completely just flying above my body and not able to be there. And so, when you're experiencing stuff that severe, you at least I got obsessed with health very quickly. I originally wanted to study to become a doctor, I guess, for the wrong reasons. And then I got a taste of what the medical system is like for chronic illnesses, which was a lot of doctors kind of gaslighting me or telling me it was in my head or just giving me pills and not listening to me or, making me do unnecessary like procedures and testing. It was all this kind of, milking me, I suppose, right? And so that kind of alienated me from conventional medicine pretty quickly, and it launched me down a long path of exploring the alternative and looking through the internet to find all sorts of diets. So I tried everything from veganism to carnivore to keto to starch based to one meal a day fasting, to elimination diets and everything in between. And it was just very just terrible having to really control every aspect of my life. I tried, tens of thousands on supplements and probably hundreds of thousands total with practitioners, with like naturopaths and acupuncturists, and even worked with a dentist turned natural healer who's doing muscle testing and all this stuff, like so many different practitioners. And I kept running into the same recurring themes, right? Which was I would try something that would give me a little bit of symptom relief, and I would talk all about it. Like I had to like validate that system or that supplement or that diet I was doing, to validate that to everyone else, just to prove to myself that it was actually working. And then I would go back to feeling terrible, which, by the way, I think is what happens to a lot of vegans. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but that is a very common thing I see. So, and I eventually got to a point where I really was just like broken. I was a completely broken individual. There's a specific time I was at a restaurant with my dad, and I was just living at home. I was unable to work. I was unable to just live a normal life at all. Like no social life, no anything, right? Just, obsessing around healing. And, I was with my dad and I broke down crying. And I was like, hey, nothing I do is working. I don't know what to do anymore. Um, and I'd heard some stuff about detox and I just kind of wanted to give it a shot. So I asked him for like a little bit of money and, help me out in that regard. And so I started exploring the world of detoxification. And that was the first thing that started pushing the needle for the first time since the journey began. Like really like lastingly started to push the needle. Was working on binding and drainage and that kind of stuff. And then it was great for a few months. And then I started exploring parasite cleansing and chelation, and I made myself exponentially worse. And I started to feel super depleted. And it was actually even worse than I was before. And I couldn't understand what was happening and all this stuff that I thought was supposed to be working. And that put me to an even worse place, right? It's just a completely just dark space. And I ended up, praying essentially for a solution. Like, hey, like I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do anymore. Just kind of bring a solution to me because this is it's a I just don't know what to do. And I was really contemplating suicide, and I was just, in that kind of space. And several days later of praying every day, I got invited to a little online Google Meet with a few different healers. And there was this person there that just had this really kind of grounded humor, but also the dude kind of completely understood what I was going through. He wouldn't flinch when I would explain like the depths of my pain to him. And he's like, oh yeah, have you ever heard of mineral bouncing? Essentially. And I was like, oh, no, I've seen some articles, but I haven't really given it a shot. And so I gave it a shot. And that was, I think, the final missing piece of my puzzle that pulled everything together. And within about 6 months, was a different person. And, fast forward several years, I integrated mineral bouncing with all the stuff I learned with detoxification. And I'm just in the best health of my life by far. And I'm just living, honestly, like a life I could have never even imagined I could live. I didn't even know what was possible of the human experience until I thoroughly detoxified and remineralized myself. So yeah, and I started becoming a practitioner and a coach several years ago. And so I've just kind of giving back what's been shared with me.
Well, thank you for sharing. First of all, I know there's some stuff in there, right? Like there's some deep stuff in there, and I first want to say, and I know that you and I have chatted, obviously off air, but I have to say that just hearing sort of this version of it, and even though I even listened to you on Matt's podcast and so forth, I don't think that I realized how much our lives and ways parallel, from the time that things happened in life, that 17, 18-year-old, like the kickoff, the emotional stress that kicked off the health concern, the constipation where you were going to the bathroom once a week, the anxiety and the spiraling, the mental health concerns, the feeling of I'm never going to get through this. I'm never going to get better. For me, largely there was a lot of, and still working through it, a lot of chronic pain attached, a lot of like nervous system stuckness, things of that nature. And even to the point of doing a parasite cleanse with a doctor's supervision back in my early, I should say mid to late 20s, that actually ended in complete disaster and left me in a position of like possibly even being like, I ended up not being hospitalized, but it looked like it was going down that road.
Yeah.
So to say that I relate to portions of your story is a total understatement. I feel it in a way that just, it resonates hard. It hits me like in a deep place because, it can be so frustrating when you are doing what you consider to be everything that there is to do. Every corner you think that you've looked in, every, book that you've read, you're just seeking and seeking and seeking. And it's band-aiding it enough to where you think that you're getting somewhere, but really you're kind of walking in circles. And so, to say that that those prayers that you prayed, obviously they made a huge difference because now look, right? And it's such a testimony to the fact that like, do not give up. I just want to really, I think it's a beautiful place to start actually,
Yeah.
because it really is, you can be in the darkest place. You can think that nothing is going to change. And that is not the case, and you're absolutely 1000% proof of that.
Beautiful words.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it's just crazy that you have your story so, similar to mine in so many ways. I
Oh,
couldn't agree more. Persistence, I think, is like one of the most powerful traits today because there's so much darkness and so much stagnation within people and systems to navigate and things to learn. If there's any trait that I think has really served me the best, besides my faith, I think is persistence.
yeah.
And I think that's an X factor for people to get well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that persistence goes hand in hand with resiliency because the more you persist, the more you see and discover that your resiliency, even in really tough, like desert like seasons. And I am absolutely no stranger to those seasons. I mean, long suffering, I can almost put that in my middle name somewhere, but it's so true. And I just think that, yeah, I pray that, there was someone out there just even in the first few minutes of the show when they heard what you said, it was sort of a renewed feeling, that was given to them because I think there are a lot of stuck people out there and there are a lot of people who are searching and who are waiting for things to change. And I think that, if nothing else, your story alone gives people hope.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were talking about, so there's so much to discuss here, right? Like we can go in like 5,000 different avenues and there you just have so much to offer, truly. Like there's just so many different places we can go. But we kind of both came to the conclusion that it's important to sort of foundationally start at like, how did we get to this point where detox is so important for people? And I think there's a lot of questions surrounding. It's a buzzword now. Everyone's quote unquote, detoxing. Everyone's looking to do something. But why has life changed to where we need this to be at sort of the forefront of our minds to some degree? And you hear the whole like, oh, well, we have a liver for that, that whole
Yeah.
argument. So why don't you give us a little bit of like your thoughts about
Sure.
this? Like what's happening in general?
Sure. Yeah. So it really starts all the way back with the origins of the American medical system as well. For anyone who isn't hip to this, I would highly recommend looking into the Flexner report and that whole story. But essentially, it was, I think, John David Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie essentially helped an underfunded American Medical Association get the funding they needed by essentially taking over their health education program. And that led to the creation of something called the Flexner Report. And so John David Rockefeller was an oil tycoon with lots and lots of byproducts that he wanted to make a use for. And so through his, I think it was the Rockefeller Biomedical Institute, they essentially created this illusion of oil-based pharmaceuticals being the gold standard for medicine and everything else that was being practiced for centuries with so much empirical evidence of its effectiveness all of a sudden became the alternative and became worthy of being ridiculed, right? And so within a few years of the publishing of the report, about 80% of medical schools had closed in the country, and the ones that were left were forced to follow this new doctrine. And the ones that did follow it were handsomely rewarded with immense amounts of funding. And so very quickly, that created the situation we're in now, because then all the science is funded really by pharma, big pharma. And so there's no real motivation to keep looking for what's actually creating chronic illness. Otherwise, we would have known a long time ago. The scientific consensus would be that toxins are really at the root of it. And so that kind of corruption spread into many other government agencies as well. And the agencies that are supposed to be keeping us safe and making sure our food, water, air, all that is clean, have turned a blind eye because of lobbying. And so we are now because of all that, because of all the people turning the blind eye, we're in a very terrible situation of record pollution. And that is probably the biggest issue facing humanity, I think, right now, because we have levels of heavy metals thousands of times higher than any other point in human history. We have hundreds of thousands of untested chemicals and hundreds of thousands of tested chemicals that we know for sure have biological impacts. We have huge issue with toxic agriculture and pesticides and processed foods, electromagnetic radiation that hasn't been properly tested for human safety. And actually, there are good studies to show that the same frequency bands used for telecommunications have biological impacts on the way our cells communicate with each other, right? And cause our cells to freak out and leak ATP and all this stuff. And so it's just created this perfect storm of immense toxicity, immense nutrient depletion, and just people either being chronically ill or just not being able to thrive. I mean, the entire human condition's essentially been it's been dialed down several levels in terms of our power to make change, to get things done, to think clearly, to connect to the world around us and to each other and to ourselves. And so detox is not even in my opinion, and it's not just because I do detox professionally, but I really do think it is not a luxury. It is a requirement to stay sane and healthy for not only now, your current years, but your later years as well, because our environment isn't going to get any less toxic anytime soon, I think, right? It's a lot to undo. And so how do we purify ourselves and return to a state of resiliency so our body can handle the situation we're in and we don't have to live in a little bubble?
Yeah.
Right. And so what you mentioned as well, like a common argument I hear is like, oh, well, we have liver and kidneys. Like we do all the detoxing we need. Um, there's several things wrong with that very simplistic statement. First off, like fish have liver and kidneys, and we know for a fact they accumulate very high levels of mercury and plastics and PCBs and phthalates and all sorts of stuff. If you analyze people who have passed away, so human brains, for example, the people who have Alzheimer's or people who have autism often have really high levels of aluminum in their brain, or fluoride in certain areas, or glyphosate. Or you look at people who passed on really high levels of lead in their bones. You can do biopsies as well, fat biopsies, and see what's in there. And something I practice is hair tissue mineral analysis. And most people have heavy metals showing up, especially aluminum, mercury, and a handful of others. 90% of people have glyphosate coming out in their urine, right? And yeah, it's just everyone's being affected by it, really. And it's just about how resilient are you and how much are you accumulating. So
All of that is so beautifully said. There's so many there's so many places that I, like sort of like tagged in my mind to address. But I think the first thing that I want to say is that you're so right, that it's like a dismantling of the human condition. It really is. I think that you and I, when we were chatting a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how people's capacity is, we I think we get used to the low level. And so we're not really even thinking like day to day just about how most people are operating at probably like a 30 to 50% capacity, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, because we're used to it. Like anything, when it becomes your norm, you're not really questioning it anymore. And what's happening around us is not like, it's not purposeful. There is a lot of things going on in which I believe that people know the toxicity that's being infiltrated into our worlds, into our, wherever you are, whether you're in a city or you're not in a city where it's still happening. And so I feel like that's a it's a big deal. And I think in order to push back in a proactive way, and not in a way that is, like, let's not operate out of a place of fear. I talk about that a lot on this show, but I think that it is imperative to understand the principles that you're discussing about detox, because it's not, like you said, a luxury. It is something that we have to probably approach now the same way that we approach something like, I don't know, habits that we are really used to, such as, washing our hair, brushing our teeth. And I'm not saying like we're detoxing, like we're doing heavy things every single day. But I think that it is something that definitely needs to be discussed that still isn't being discussed mainstream.
yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, it's a new set of self-care habits, really. And there's no need to be afraid of it. I know I said I laid out a kind of doom and gloom scenario, but there's also, it's probably been no better time to be sick because of how many tools we have available to heal. It's just so profound, the work that's being done right now in like the holistic health space. So, there's a difference also between an intensive protocol, right, which is the stuff you do with people who are chronically ill or want to make a lot of progress quickly if they're kind of just trying to get to the next level. And then there is the long-term little habits that will just protect you, the use of a high quality selective binder, or simple things like sauna therapy,
Mm.
or simple things like making sure your mineral levels are up. It can go a
Yeah.
long way. It doesn't have to be complicated and can really help you. It's great. It's funny as it sounds, they essentially be almost superhuman in a time where, the normal is so sick.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. And it's so crazy too that you said it's almost like a great time to be sick, because I just did a post on that maybe a week or so ago, maybe two, about how we often talk about getting we're so overwhelmed with health information, especially those who are invested. They're on social media, they're kind of like in it, they're digging. And it can be really overwhelming, and you have to create boundaries around that, because it can definitely like send you into a spiral in the opposite direction and delay your healing. But how often do we actually focus on the other side of it, the perspective of let's have some serious gratitude for the amount of information that we have at our fingertips today, because it is crazy. You do not even have to search very far. Everybody has something for you. There is niches within niches. Everything is covered, and it is here for you if you start to investigate. So I love that you brought that up, because I think that there's a real gratitude piece here that people miss. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. And not just that, there is a weird kind of, there's this idea of the mental field that animals of the same species kind of share a collective
Mm.
consciousness almost. I know that sounds really out there, but there's a really good example to kind of exemplify this, which is the 100 monkey experiment, where there were essentially monkeys on an island, figured out a new way, again, on an island, separate from any other monkey around the world, figured out a new way to open coconuts, I believe it was. And once 100 monkeys figured it out on that island, on the other side of the world, monkeys of the same species also started doing the same thing, and there was no connection between the two. So, on a human perspective, it's also kind of why once one person did a 4 minute mile, then all of a sudden a bunch of people started doing the 4 minute mile. It like shattered a collective belief and also created a pathway for people to get there. And the amount of people that are healing from really serious situations is creating a very wide channel for a lot of people to get there.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, that is so true. It's so true. The amount of I love that how you just said that. The amount of people are healing from really extreme things is very it's heavy right now. It's vast in a way that's amazing and beautiful, right? Because we're not seeing that in earlier years or decades. It's so true. And also it's a very hopeful truth, right? Because again, like we were talking about just a few minutes ago, there's hope for anybody who's listening or anybody out there. I know that you were pointing to some. Let's go into this a little bit. You were pointing to some things that are really stressful to the human body, right? Like you mentioned, we're going to get into some of these, like glyphosate, aluminum, heavy metals. How are they getting in our, in our food, or why are they in our air? Some of us know
sure,
that.
sure.
But we can talk about that in a second as well. It's one of my
Mhm,
favorite topics.
mhm.
But what do you think, like in your practice, when you're working with clients, what surprises you the most, or what things are you seeing that are fairly common that are just like, just do not make sense to people, or kind of like fly under the radar?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. There's a handful of things that are just ubiquitous in our environment, and so they're pretty much a part of almost everyone's treatment protocols. So one is the aluminum, which is coming from the sky. If you go to geoengineeringwatch.org, you can find hundreds of studies and experiments that were done to prove that there's nanonized aluminum coming down from the air. A very simple way to prove that is that rain, snow, and soil analysis is showing really high levels of aluminum, which is not natural. Aluminum is not found by itself in nature in any capacity. It's highly reactive element that always binds and is found to other elements, especially silica. And so we are finding it in the rain, in the snow, in the soil, and we are finding it in people. The most common thing I see on a hair test, a hair mineral analysis, is high aluminum. Every single hair test I have ever done has had high aluminum. And so that's a big issue because that is a very potent neurotoxin. It's a mitochondrial poison. So it's definitely contributing to a lot of the brain fog and the fatigue that people are experiencing, and especially the neurodegeneration. As I mentioned earlier, the Alzheimer's cadavers, they have very high levels of aluminum in their brain. So that's a big one. The other one is glyphosate. Dr. Stephanie Seneff has done some really wonderful research on glyphosate and has really been the one who's brought it to the forefront. But as I mentioned, it's found in over 90% of people's urine. And I would reckon that 10% that you don't find it in are the most sick because they're not excreting the glyphosate. It is because it is used in so many different capacities, but especially as a desiccant. Simply after you harvest the crop, you can dry it out very quickly by spraying it with a bunch of glyphosate, and that allows you to preserve a lot of your yields. Also, a lot of the GMO situation is about making it as resistant as possible to pesticides that should kill the plants. And so this very common usage of glyphosate in all sorts of processed products and wheat and common things that people are consuming regularly is also getting into the water. So that's another way that people are getting exposed. And so it's just something that people should consider, and it's very simple to deal with, actually. But glyphosate will really nuke a person's microbiome. It will destroy a lot of the microbes that are involved in something called the Shitamaki pathway, I believe it is, which helps produce a lot of the neurotransmitters from our gut that make us feel happy, like serotonin, dopamine, many others. So so often people are kind of missing the point when they're trying to do probiotics and probiotic-based foods and trying to heal their gut that way with maybe some L-glutamine when they haven't detoxified the pesticides, especially glyphosate, that is really creating a lot of dysbiosis. So that's a big focus. You can achieve that very easily with fulvic humic acids, like really high quality ones. Third-party tested Shilajit, like Mitolife, shout out Matt Blackburn.
Yes.
But there's many other products like Ion Gut Support. There is Austrian peat extract from KI Science and quite a few others. Cellcore has some good fulvic humic as well. So that's a big thing to think about. And so those are probably the two most common. Beyond that, there's often a lot of leaky gut that people are experiencing. I mean, even if they don't have outright digestive symptoms, they just may have a general inflammation due to particles going in through the tight junctions. They also usually will have a decrease in their ability to detoxify because there is an impairment in the gut, which I can talk about a little bit later. That goes into whole like explanation on drainage pathways, but that's a very, very common thing. Another thing that is I learned about pretty recently, a few years ago, is the retroviral stress.
Ooh.
And that has a lot to do with our Wi-Fi exposure. And again, we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about the retrovirus thing because I think it's so prevalent and it's also something that's impacted me. So it's something that, to your point, because you told me this, weeks prior, most people are not thinking about it. There are practitioners out there that know about this stuff, but most
Yeah.
people have no clue that it could be impacting them. And again, not
Yeah.
from a fear-based standpoint, just from a informational standpoint. It's a fascinating topic, so I'm excited to dig into it with you. Also, it's so funny as you were talking about glyphosate. Just this morning, I was, for the probably 100th time, I was talking with my mom about getting cereal out of their house. And, for obvious reasons, especially because most of that stuff is heavily sprayed and, the crops are just decimated by the time they're done. And I think that it's important to share, to your point, that it's not just about eliminating this stuff in the house, but it's also about eliminating it from you because this stuff is accumulating. So if someone is thinking, oh, well, I removed all these products from my life, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been depleted in a good way from your body. What do you have to say about that?
It's a great point. because that's sometimes what people go to when they want to like live a low toxin lifestyle. They really focus on the external, and that's
That,
fantastic. That's
yeah,
important.
great. Yeah.
That's important. But you also have to think about how many decades you've been being exposed to stuff from all different places. And so you definitely want to think about purifying your own body. There's so many ways to do it. But ultimately, if you do it well, you will regain your resilience to those same toxic insults. And so, for example, one of the most common causes of gluten sensitivity is glyphosate toxicity,
Mm.
simply because of how similar of molecules they are. And there's a graph I saw actually where as glyphosate was being introduced to the food supply, then celiac disease followed a very direct trend year after year. Obviously, correlation doesn't mean causation, but what I see clinically is that when you do a good job of detoxifying glyphosate, there are many cases where people can eat gluten again and not have, insane gut issues or insane brain issues. And that was the case for me as well. I mean, I could only have one bite of bread and it would send me into a flare for a week.
Wow.
And now I can just, I mean, I literally had a burger with some friends yesterday. I mean, it just doesn't really impact me.
That's awesome. I personally I've been gluten free for, oh gosh, many, many years. And I think I went gluten free maybe 15 years ago. And it's so easy now that I just never really went back. But I'll be honest with you, there's a part of me that's, wants to go to the bakery and be like, can I get some sourdough? You know what I mean? I just haven't because I think I'm just so used to the lifestyle. But I would be interested to see what would occur if I did, introduce it back into my days. But yeah, just from an inflammatory standpoint, I cut that out years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I'm all about balance. I lived such a rigid lifestyle for so many years of trying to control everything and taking so many supplements every day and having to control my sleep exactly. And I was afraid to get out of my little bubble. I was a little bubble boy essentially, so I couldn't live my life and I couldn't I couldn't trust myself to go to social outings or, and I missed a lot of stuff because of that. It was a really, really lonely time.
Mm.
And so I've kind of gone back to a place that I think is a little more balanced,
Yeah.
which is more of like an 80-20. 80% of my lifestyle is really locked in. It's what I try to teach clients, right? As much as you can, your day-to-day habits, what you're eating at home, really lock that in. And then whatever 20 or 10 or 5%, depending on how sick you are and where you're at, like give yourself some leeway. And I think gluten for me is one of those things. Obviously, gluten right now isn't good for you because it's just the wheat is so high in glyphosate
Yeah.
and the breads are often not prepared properly. So the grains are supposed to be, soaked, sprouted, or fermented. So if you are going to do it, like sourdough is a good choice, for example, like real sourdough. But uh, but yeah, again, I like to live a balanced life, right?
I honestly think that's the best way, It really is. I mean, I think that, and this is a whole nother topic for another day, but I just think that the extreme way to live is so stressful that it ends up being more stressful than the things that you're trying to eradicate from your life. And so I think it's really important to have that balance and not to make balance. I talk about this sometimes on social media, not to make balance like an excuse and a justification for your poor habits. Oh, it's balance. Like, no, not really. You're just not making great decisions, right? Like people could
Yeah.
go on that side of the, swing the pendulum that way. But it is so true. I think the goal for most of us, if you're not there yet, is to lead a life where your habits are dialed in, like you said, but you're able to have a little bit of breathing room, and go out and enjoy life. And I think that that's really important, and it's part of health also.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of what you're saying speaks to the power of just like radical truth as well. Because it's not just about like speaking truth to other people, but it's like how truthful are you with yourself? Because you can very easily gaslight yourself into living a very unhealthy lifestyle because you don't want to face the music about what you're doing to yourself.
That is so good. That is so good. It's so true. And we're going to get into a little bit of that too, I think, in this conversation about how detoxing. Oh, you guys, there's so many things that I want to touch on with Kyle. I just feel like it's amazing, but how how detoxing is so much more than just a physical thing, right?
Yeah.
It really taps
Yeah.
into so many different facets of our being. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's I just love this topic so much. As we sort of segue here, and I do want to dig into some of the stressors that you talked about, and we'll start off with the retrovirus conversation. But before
Okay.
we do, can you just, for someone who might be brand new to the topic or the discussion of minerals,
Mhm.
in just like sort of a, umbrella type of a way, can you share why our minerals would be so affected or stressed or thrown out of balance because of these stressors like glyphosate, like aluminum and like other things in our environment?
Sure. So, so it's coming from several angles, but minerals are the basic building blocks of our bodies. I mean, they have a really profound impact on all our hormonal systems, all our neurotransmitter balance, and just generally how we feel and how resilient we are and how strong our immune system is. It's all touched in some way by minerals. And the situation we are in today is that we have lost the ancient ways of really respecting the land and keeping it alive and rich of minerals. And instead, we have chased products and end products. And so we've created a very toxic agricultural kind of system that is stripping the soil of minerals. And so I think I saw it was like a carrot today has like what, like 10% of the minerals it had 100 years ago. And there's several other that are kind of following in the same suit. So that's one angle of it, right? Our soils are simply not as rich with things like zinc and magnesium and selenium as they once were. The other aspect of it is that there's competition or actual stealing of minerals by different toxins and by pathogens as well. So glyphosate, actually, one of the ways it works is by chelating minerals out of our bodies. And so it will actually steal like our zinc and it'll steal our calcium, but particularly it can steal things like manganese and create an imbalance. So actually cause it to accumulate in the wrong forms in different parts of the body, which is why, when we talk about minerals, I practice something called mineral balancing, which is not just about how do you restore the body and rebuild it, but how you also bring things into balance with minerals that are not available, that are accumulating in different parts of the body. Quick example there, there's a big issue with calcification today, right? Calcification of arteries, but also calcification of all different parts of the body and scars and plaques and all that. And that's calcium is important for us, but it's being accumulated in the wrong places. And so balancing is about bringing the calcium where it needs to go, right? So the toxins, right? Glyphosate, that's a big one. There's also competition between metals and other toxins and the good minerals. So, for example, fluoride and chlorine and bromide, they have a direct antagonism, so competition with iodine, and will actually push it out of the places we need it the most, like our brain and our thyroid and our sexual organs, right? Our breasts and our or our, our, you know, private parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, so not only do we have not enough iodine coming in, but we have then this competition from these things that are, chlorine from the pools and bromide in the bread and fluoride in the water. And so that's another aspect of it. Same thing happens with heavy metals. They will compete for binding to enzyme binding sites with our good minerals. So cadmium will displace zinc, for example, or mercury from things like amalgam fillings or air pollution or large seafood will displace selenium and damage our glutathione production. It'll damage our brain and perhaps or even our higher thinking. So yeah, it's a very multifaceted issue. The other thing to consider is that wherever there's a toxic environment, there are pathogens and there are parasites. So that's a known phenomenon in biology, uh, and that's a whole other topic in of itself.
Yep.
But for the most part, they also can actually they can serve essentially as like a cleanup crew and they can accumulate a lot of the toxins we cannot deal with, but then they also steal a lot of our minerals.
Yeah.
So.
I'm glad that you brought up, first of all, that was beautifully explained about the minerals and, just how there's competition and there's a lot of, yeah, it's so crazy, right? There's so much synergy that's supposed to be there, but there's so much disruption that ends up being there because of what we're living and how we're living. And in terms of the parasite discussion, gosh, what a loud topic this has become in the health space, in the health communities, because I think there's so much. I really hesitate to use the word misinformation because that drives me nuts. But at the same time, I think that the parasite discussion and parasitic activity is really misunderstood. And that, a lot of people don't even understand that we all have parasitic activity in our body and it's meant to sort of live in, homeostasis, or I should say like there's a symbiotic relationship between those parasites and the rest of us. But when that stuff gets out of line and out of balance, they kind of come in and play a different sort of a role. And sometimes things can get out of control. And that's when it becomes a problem. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So well, the weird thing is, I'm not really a believer in that there are like good and bad bugs. There are just organisms that are out of place, right, or overgrown.
Yeah.
But even so, parasites that essentially take more than they are giving, they may not even be fully considered a parasite sometimes because we are having them for a specific purpose, which is there are times that some parasites can accumulate a lot of heavy metals within to their own bodies. Candida is an example with that. Candida is a natural part of our microbiome, just in smaller amounts, but it overgrows in a lot of people, and people then think Candida is the enemy. But there are studies that show that Candida can concentrate mercury hundreds of times higher into its cell walls than we can in our tissues.
Wow.
And so often Candida overgrowth is fueled by the metal toxicity. And so attacking it will often do more harm than good because you're not dealing with the mercury and often can redistribute the mercury as well as now the mycotoxins or the endotoxins. And you're running into all hosts of issues. Um, in biology, right? So parasites are often described as pollution sinks. Wherever there is a toxic load, so in a polluted river or polluted part of the ocean, the organisms that live there have a high parasite load compared to non-polluted parts. So actually, a very simple way to determine how toxic parts of the ocean are is to look at whale poop and see how many parasites are in the whale poop. And that's a very common way that biologists will look at how toxic that part of the ocean is. So with fish, for example, in polluted rivers, the more polluted it is, the more parasites they have. And you actually look at the parasites themselves. They often have heavy metal levels and pesticide levels hundreds of times higher within the parasites than the fish themselves. So they are often a end result of the toxic world that we live in, and it's almost like our bodies and it's somehow incredible intelligence knew that bringing in more parasites would allow us to deal with something we couldn't deal with before.
Wow.
So that is often right there why most parasite cleanses fail as well, because most parasite cleanses are about waging war against the bad bugs. And really what that is waging war against yourself, because there was a reason why a lot of them were there. Now, of course, once you detoxify, once you have gotten rid of the need for them, then they are true parasites and often need to be like reduced and cleansed. But often, I see quite a lot with people who are even just doing the beginning phases of detoxification and mineral balancing will start releasing a bunch of visible parasites because their immune systems come back online. Their body doesn't really need it as much anymore. So yeah, it's a very complex topic. And the weird thing about it too is parasites are really not just some really third world issue, right? They are unbelievably common. And the biggest issue is that there's no good testing for it. There's a lot of reasons why. Parasites, for example, really don't come out through the poop unless they're sick or dying, right? For the most part, they will stay attached and cozy right where they are. They are also often not just in the colon, they can be in other parts of the body, like the gallbladder or in connective tissue and all sorts of other areas. And so if you look only in the poop for something that is in, a knee joint or in the muscle tissue, you're not going to find it. right? And so there's that, and there's even a lot of parasites have enzymes that will degrade themselves very quickly, degrade all their DNA within 15 to 20 minutes of them coming out through the poop. It makes testing a very complicated thing. Uh, so the people who are in the know, there's a lot of doctors that are in the know about this, know that parasites are just a common issue for essentially everyone. And I know that's crazy to say, but I will say 8 out of 10 of my clients will see something visible come out of them. And so, yeah, it's a crazy topic and a crazy issue.
It is. It's really actually quite fascinating. And, I think that it just goes to show that where we look at something as parasites, as the devil among us, it's really just it's another example of just an adaptation and the way that the body tries to protect itself to the best of its ability by using something like parasites. And there's just such a relationship that goes beyond most people's comprehension or thinking about how the body works and the relationship to the environment in general. It's absolutely fascinating to me how divinely intelligent our body is and what kind of things it will do to keep us in a position of or staying afloat, for lack of better terminology. You know what I mean? It's really, really fascinating to me. Also, my second point/question is that are there situations, because I would assume that there's probably some people listening that, say they feel fairly healthy, right? Or
Mhm.
they feel fairly like they're cruising
Mhm.
along, but they came into a situation where there was something that like was obviously ingested or obviously they came in contact with something, right? I even think about my little girl Pearl. She ate
Mhm.
what I assume to be a flea.
Mhm.
And a few months later, I don't actually know when that incubation period started, but a few months later, here we are with a tapeworm. And so I had
Yeah.
to go to tried to treat it naturally, tried to sort of
Yeah.
like do all the things and had to go to the deworming process
Mhm.
because she had a tapeworm. And as you said, the evidence was coming out in her poop as well.
Yeah.
So, are there situations where someone could be, for the most part, fairly balanced, but then they come into a situation where it's like there's an obvious introduction to something and it ends up wreaking havoc?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're probably hardwired kind of evolutionarily to sense situations like that
Mm,
because, you know, parasites are unbelievably intelligent and have really incredible ways to not just evade the immune system and set up shop, but then also manipulate their hosts. And so there's a really good book, Your Brain on Parasites, that talks about a lot of the environmental situations where there are many species that probably wouldn't survive if it wasn't for the neurological influence of parasites, making fish hang around the top of a pond instead of towards the bottom because the parasite within it wants to be consumed by the bird that comes and eats it because it needs to reproduce in the intestines of the bird. So it's pretty crazy. That's a very common situation. I think the most common ones are just eating raw fish,
mm,
um, and that can do it as well. And then even if people are generally healthy too, it's still very common for people to have them. So it is something that I think should be explored at the right time and with the right guidance, and I think should be done also kind of later in a person's journey just because you want to make sure they are stable and can handle like what comes when you detoxify parasites, not just the release of biotoxins and metals, but also the emotional releases that can come with it because of how intertwined they can be with your neurochemistry and their ability to influence neurotransmitter balance. But yeah, absolutely. And in terms of I don't use pharmaceuticals in my practice, so I'm not a medical doctor. But I have heard that the medical pharmaceutical parasite products can work really well. Um, but that's something to speak to your doctor about.
yeah. Yeah. Disclaimer, people.
Yeah, of
Disclaimer.
course.
But yeah, I mean, for for Pearl personally, I had to go with fenbendazole just because,
Yeah,
there was like a quality when you're dealing with animals, and I know we're not talking
yeah.
about animals right now, although they are equally as impacted by the things that we are discussing, and I've seen it
Mhm.
firsthand. It's like quality of life is also a very big situation, especially with
Yeah.
animals, right?
Yeah.
It's different, the same but different.
Yeah.
And after trying to, sort of tackle that with a more holistic perspective in mind, I had to do the whole Fenben route in it. Thank goodness, there's a
Yeah.
reason for it. There's a reason why they offer those things.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, medical system has its uses, but I
Yeah,
think everyone should be approaching their interaction with it in the most informed way possible. So,
well
you know,
said.
just be
Absolutely.
empowered.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go back to the retrovirus topic, the discussion. I mean, you and I have talked about it very briefly, so I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about it. And again, I relate to this part of the discussion a lot. And I think that I'm going to get something out of it. So I want you to give us a little bit of a rundown, explain and discuss what are retroviruses to begin with, and what is the implication when we're talking about, the body being out of balance, how they can sort of come, show their face, so to speak, disrupt mineral balance, and yeah, how it's related to detox overall.
Yeah. So there's two different kinds of retroviruses. There's the exogenous retroviruses, which, HIV is the one that everyone knows, and that's obviously the most severe one. But there are hundreds of others, and that's a thing. But the real one of this topic is the ones that are called human endogenous retroviruses. So they are ones that are already part of our genome, that we have been exposed to through millions of years of evolution, right? And so, they say 2% of our DNA is for making proteins. And it used to be that, 98% was junk DNA, right? We now know it's actually about regulating and doing other functions. But an entire 8% of our genome is actually retroviruses that are embedded, again, through all those years of evolution. And so our bodies invest a immense amount of resources to keep those retroviruses silenced for the most part, and that is mainly methylation, acetylation, right? But there's other mechanisms as well. And so Dr. Judy Mikovits is the one who's been sounding the alarm on this for decades, and only now have a lot of doctors started to really listen on this. But it is essentially our modern environment has created a situation where there is an unleashing of those endogenous retroviruses, and they start expressing. And when they express, they essentially cause your immune system to freak out and not work properly. And that can manifest as autoimmunity, like attacking itself. And it can also manifest as deficiency, like an AIDS minor, where you cannot keep a hold on your parasites, or you can't keep a lid on the Lyme disease, and you can't keep a lid on the mold colonizations and all sorts of other things like that, right? So it is particularly an issue among the chronically ill. They tend to have a far higher expression of retroviral stress, and there's a lot of lab exams you can do, like Nagalase is maybe the main one. Um, but yeah, this is just absolutely been a game changer topic to explore, and I learned it from Dr. Judy Mikovits and Dr. Klinghart, who's applied it in his practice for several years now and has seen some really phenomenal results with his patient population. Um, Once you are able to essentially quiet the retroviral expression, because herbs and plants on this planet have been exposed to the same retroviruses for countless years and have developed all sorts of compounds to defend against it. Once you're able to kind of calm that stressor down, everything else tends to get a lot milder in someone. So someone who had severe Lyme disease may now have more of a mild Lyme disease and can be treated essentially within a few months instead of years of antibiotics, right? Same thing happens for parasite overload. Sometimes that is a contributing factor why people cannot seem to resolve their parasites, even though they've been doing cleanses for years. The more they do, the more comes out, right? So it's a very interesting one. I really encourage people to do their own research and just look into it. But the human endogenous retroviruses are the main point of it, and probably the main thing that is driving that is our Wi-Fi environment. Wi-Fi disables our cellular defenses against those retroviruses and allows them to express. And it's a cumulative, slow thing. It doesn't happen from being next to Wi-Fi once. It happens from being next to Wi-Fi, sleeping next to your Wi-Fi router for decades, and being on your phone 8 hours a day for decades. There's the whole other piece with the exogenous retroviruses. That is something that, again, I would just look into Judy Mikovits' book, Plague of Corruption. She talks about, the relationship between that and vaccines. It's very crazy, long latency periods, but it's a very important thing that I think people should really inform themselves. There's a lot of great resources out there. It has really changed the game for my own life because that was something that when I addressed in my own healing journey as well, I really just had some massive breakthroughs in being able to fully resolve some chronic infections, as well as, I've seen it a lot with my clients as well.
Wow. And we can put that book in the show notes too for people that are interested in learning more about it. I think it's worth doing that. And the other thing I wanted to say, well, two things actually, is that I love that you brought up the point about people who are continually cleansing and seeing just an onslaught more and more and more, even though they've been doing it for a long time. I have friends actually that have been in that situation and are in that situation where they're like, I can't believe that after, doing whatever, I mean, whatever kind of, detoxing protocol they're in, or coffee enemas consistently or whatever, it's
Mhm.
just like, is this
Keeps coming.
ever, yeah, it just keeps coming, liver flushing, I mean, you name it, right? They've done 180 and it's still going on. And it's not to say that the protocol isn't great, or that the modality is, there isn't some benefit to that, but at the same time, this piece is, I think, just absolutely silenced,
Yeah.
and it's worth
Yeah.
looking into.
Yeah, it's huge. Obviously, this isn't the only reason why someone may have, like, therapy resistant parasites. It could be like a mineral deficiency thing as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, it's huge, and that's one of the reasons why. I mean, I absolutely love melatonin because melatonin does many things, many things. High dose melatonin, right? So we're talking like, several hundred milligrams. It's a fantastic detox agent, fantastic mitochondrial support, anti-inflammatory, mast cell stabilizer, and anti-parasitic. But one of the very interesting things it does is it's an antiretroviral as well. And
Ah.
so it's a very powerful tool for that.
Would you say that somebody can jump into taking something like melatonin, with just off the cuff, or do you feel like it would be properly placed in a protocol that would require like some sort of, say practitioner supervision, or could someone just experiment with it?
Well, all of this, first off, is not medical advice, and this is all for information on it and
Absolutely.
entertainment purposes. So this is something to talk to your doctor and your
Yes,
practitioner about.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's
But
also listed on the in the every podcast show notes,
yeah,
friends.
of
So
course. Yeah.
definitely.
Just to be clear, right? Because, it's there's some things you can do by yourself, but if you're in a tough spot, like, people need help because
Yeah.
your inner guidance system gets broken essentially, and you can no longer really guide yourself using your logic and your mind because stuff gets really murky. You need someone to help pull you out of that. High dose melatonin is something I would definitely explore under the guidance of a practitioner if you're sick. People who are generally healthy can kind of do well with that as long as they are doing, binding and drainage with it and kind of placing their minerals. I have a free guide on my website that covers like binding, drainage, basic mineral stuff, just the basic first steps that kind of helps most people. So that is something that pairs well with high dose melatonin. But yeah, I mean, there's so much information out there. There's so many studies on melatonin. It's just so fascinating. But something to expect is that when you do high dose melatonin, you do eventually have a big mobilization of toxins from the brain, in particular. And so that needs to be binded, needs to be drained, needs to be cleaned out.
Very important point. And I think part of that question was actually me, because just a couple weeks ago, I was actually having a discussion with Matt about melatonin and how it felt like it was something for me to explore. I actually have not taken it, but I think there is a reason why. Now, looking at my hesitation from picking it up,
Mhm.
I think that there might be some steps, that need to be addressed in my journey, where there needs, yeah, just some things that might be they just need to be looked at, right? Or there needs to be some just some things that need to be implemented maybe prior to taking it, or taking it in like a high dose fashion. So yeah, it's just interesting because it's been on my mind, like heavily on my mind, like, do I buy it, do I try it?
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good point, because just because something is good for you doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you at the time.
That's a great point. Yeah, I always say, right thing, wrong time is the wrong thing.
Ah, love
So
that.
yeah, you just have to put things at the right time. I mean, some of the stuff that has been so transformative later in my journey would have absolutely destroyed me if I did it early.
Yeah.
And that can be my high dose melatonin for some people. It's a fantastic tool. It just kind of, again, it's about timing.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move forward here, are there any other examples that you want to highlight about retroviruses that might people might be curious still? Like, well, what other things, could this be? I mean, things that you're seeing on people's
Yeah.
radar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just don't want to create any kind of fear around it. I mean, generally, it's just they are a result of the toxic environment as well. They are a result of the EMF heavy environment. They are a result of nutrient depletion too, impacting our methylation. And so, just detox, remineralize, and consider some, if that's relevant for you and your practitioner says so, consider like tools that are antiretroviral, which are very simple herbs or like high dose melatonin, and that can really, really help crack some pretty tough cases.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely just such an interesting topic, and I want to dive a bit more into it, although I was familiar with it prior to. And I'm also someone who, fell very ill from Epstein-Barr
Yeah.
many, many, many years ago, which sort of
Yeah.
was the tick off for my journey. And so,
Yeah.
and Epstein-Barr is oh man, it's a tough one. It's such a
Yeah.
tough one.
Well, actually, if I may,
Yeah.
so there was some research on that Epstein-Barr creates an activation of the retroviruses, and it's so not so much the Epstein-Barr that does the damage, but it's then the reactivation of retroviruses that creates the long-standing damage. It's very common. I mean, I see a lot of people have a health collapse after getting mono for the first time. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely something to explore. And I don't know what my methylation status was prior to, like say growing up. I mean, I just don't have that kind of knowledge looking back. Like my memory is faint. I'm not sure. I wasn't really a sick kid growing up, which was lovely, but I do know that methylation was severely altered and impacted post sickness. And it's always been somewhat of a thing, that
Yeah.
I've had to manage and or just pay attention to. So it just makes a ton of sense for me personally.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So let's see. We've covered, gosh, parasites, retroviruses, glyphosate. What else did I want to talk? Are there any other like main toxic triggers, things that you can think of that you sort of want to touch on before we go into? I just want you to touch on like order of operations because I think that's really important because you keep talking about like, the right thing could be the wrong thing at the at the wrong time.
For sure.
But is there anything else that you want to touch on before sort of moving into the operation discussion?
Well, what I covered earlier, I think, is a good thing to focus on first, just because a lot of the tools that we'll talk about later kind of have a nice broad impact, so can clean up a lot of environmental pollutants and a lot of heavy metals all at once, not just like aluminum, not just mercury. But I think the other thing that's important to consider is a person's mental and emotional status and their health, because it is really important to be working on that level when doing any kind of physical healing, just because of the weird interconnection between our minds and our bodies. It shows up a lot in hair analysis, for example, how, different temperaments will cause a person to show up. Essentially, the minerals in their hair will show up differently. So, you may see someone who's more irritable tend to have a higher sodium potassium ratio, or a person who's angrier tends to be that way as well. Or some person who's traumatized may be in a calcium shell, or a person who is in a state of giving up will be in something called a double low ratio or a four lows. So a lot of examples of that, right? And it's a cool little window into a person's psychology. It's like one thing you can see with the hair analysis. But it's definitely to be working on that level. I think a person's connection to the divine, that's irreplaceable, and that is for each person to explore on their own. But just that can create shifts that are just so profound. But often, I mean, it's a good question. Like, well, why, if we're all being exposed to similar things, why is one person generally healthy and why is another person completely bedridden? And there's a lot of reasons why. Sometimes it is the momentum, the generational momentum of toxins and nutritional deficiencies, sure. But other times it's stuff within a person, their traumatic history, stuff they haven't processed. Often the even in the family system, if there's issues in the family system, and this is the whole work of family constellation therapy, can create essentially changes in epigenetics in the person who is ill. right? And they all of a sudden may not be able to methylate properly or hold on to their zinc and B6 and their manganese and their chromium that they need to keep a lid on their parasites and to detoxify heavy metals. And once you resolve the root emotional stressor, sometimes people can have huge healings just from that, or at least unblock them for the physical therapies to work.
Yeah. This is a really, really important part of the conversation, I feel. And I know I was sharing with you, I think offline that, part of my commitment just to my own health this year was really looking at nervous system dysregulation and that avenue and how that can really delay healing, and how there are things that may be on our map but might not even be on our map in terms of like what we're aware of or what we're conscious of. And sometimes we don't even have to be completely aware of every single trauma and every single thing, but to understand that there could be a stuckness. And our body is not broken by any means. It's like absolutely just perfect in the way that it handles things. And when we're talking about the nervous system as an example, or trauma, or emotional mental states, we can be in a position where there could be this low grade trauma that's happened over years that we don't even really consider to be trauma, right? But it's technically like a little t trauma. And it's just the silent inflammation riser over time, and there's a stuckness because when the body is not able to process and move, right? Like when you're constantly like, you're going into fight or flight consistently, and that sympathetic system is just like online, and you're not able to process those emotions, they have to go somewhere. So where do they go? Right? They get stuck, which is, there could be such a delay in healing. And that wraps right into the mineral conversation because it's all so interwoven and interconnected, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like physical scars. They're like emotional scars, and physical scars are often places where pathogens and toxins accumulate. Same thing seems to happen in the emotional level, as something that's well understood in traditional Chinese medicine. These knots or this stagnation in a person's like meridian flow will create pockets where things accumulate. And so ultimately, like the belief in Chinese medicine is like, stagnation is the way of death and flow is the way of life. And it's a simplistic way. If you have really good flow, right, in your body, you're able to detoxify and you're able to process emotions as they come. They flow through you and then out of you.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just awareness too, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how there's just so much information out there. It's so beautiful how we have the ability to learn. But I think from a mainstream perspective, it's really why I'm sitting here in the first place, right? Because I would say that at large, most people are not thinking on this level when it comes to healing, and they're missing these crucial elements and these crucial parts. And it's not to overwhelm people, but it's just to like really, just stamp the envelope with the truth that not only is your conscious, your mental and emotional state that you're aware of, that matters, but it's also this subconscious, this place that you're not really thinking about, all the things that are operating in the system that you're not, you have no concept that they're even there, and how it's affecting all of the systems of your body, if that makes sense. I just feel like, this piece is so crucial. And looking back at my history personally, without getting into detail, I wish I would have had the knowledge that I had back then. And I mean, look, that's life, right?
Yeah.
But wow, like just to see sort of the evolution and how we've learned, because you've done the same thing. It's fascinating and also just imperative at the same time, because this is a really important piece. And it's also often the corner that people don't want to look in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So true. And again, that's just like you have to be like willing to be like completely truthful with yourself, and that includes fully experiencing your pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's just so much freedom on the other side of it. And it's easier said than done. Look, I mean, we can have all the knowledge. I'll put myself in the hot seat for a second. I can have all the knowledge and awareness and even wisdom, if that's what you want to call it, about things, but it's also like still hard, right? It's still so easy for me to back off of something, or to just be like, oh, I'll look at that part of healing later. Or, you know what? That probably doesn't apply. I'll just, I'm doing enough. Or I'm under so much stress. I don't want to look in that corner. It's so easy, I think, to just find yourself there. And it's, again, I keep going back to, it's not about overwhelming. It's not about, putting yourself in a state where you're fearful and you feel like you're, like things are not possible and there's no hope for you. But I just think being aware that these facets of healing are a part of healing, that's that's really the most important part, because then I think step by step you can sort of like walk down the road. Let's get into sort of the back half here, or I should say, just moving on to sort of order of operations, because I think that that's probably one of the things that you really focus on with your clients is that there is a right and a wrong way to detox. And so, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview as to why it's important to do things step by step and not necessarily in the steps that you might think are the right steps. And then we can talk about binders and methods and so forth.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll start by talking about some of the most common mistakes, which are the ones that I learned the painful way. Very painful, absolutely brutally painful. So for example, jumping straight into a parasite cleanse when I was sick was one of the worst things I could have ever done, because it just made me exponentially worse, made my cravings out of control. It made my brain just the worst, like foggy mindedness experience possible. The other mistake I made was doing a chelation therapy, which, I don't even think a lot of medical chelators are really appropriate when there's so many better tools. But, I made that mistake and redistributed a lot of stuff, that was potentially in safer storage spaces like the fat or and the bones into my brain. And so I had all sorts of kind of worse neurological symptoms and psychiatric symptoms when I did that. Not good. Don't do that. So, um, so there is the safest order I've just found over the years, just the most general sense, is really focusing on the drainage pathways first, which is the way toxins flow from the cells all the way out through the colon and all the steps that are in between. So that is the extracellular matrix, the lymphatics, the liver, and the colon, right? The gut, as I mentioned earlier, is very leaky often, and often very toxic, very full of pesticides, full of all sorts of garbage and mucousy, ropey material that people usually see come out of them. So that ends up kind of plugging the funnel and creates this kind of bottleneck effect where then the liver can't process as much stuff. And then toxins start either accumulating or they start going into secondary organs of eliminations like the kidneys. You don't want it going through the kidneys or the skin, especially the kidneys, because the kidneys, once you damage a nephron, like your nephrons are for life. So the gut lining will actually renew itself every 3 days. And so we definitely want to push it more through that because it's a lot more able to handle the toxic onslaught rather than through our kidneys. The other thing too is that our gut has the surface area, I believe it is, of like 2 tennis courts, while the kidneys have the surface area of a ping pong table. And so ideally, really, we should be pushing the majority of the pollution all the way out through the liver into the gut, right? And that's why we really focus on the gut so much first. And then as well, supporting the liver, supporting the lymphatics, which often means, movement, sweating, and other things like that. And once you optimize that drainage funnel, you're going to clear out a lot of the low-hanging fruit, a lot of the stuff that's kind of ready to come out, that's kind of hanging out in the extracellular matrix or is in the gut or so on and so forth. And so then you can start actually getting stuff out of the cells, right? But also, most importantly, is that then you can start getting the parasites out. Because if you work on the parasites when there's so much stuff still in the extracellular space and really toxic gut, you're going to have a massive release of metals and biotoxins that can't be drained out properly. And then that will create all sorts of issues. And the parasites won't even go away because they're going to still want to stay in a toxic terrain. So even if you get some of them out, your body's going to bring them right back in if you're not detoxifying. Right? So the focus, first and foremost, is the drainage pathways, right? That's just what I find works best. For sensitive clients too, it's important to think about things like mast cell activation, which is just an overactivation of a part of their immune system that causes, essentially, it's like the house is on fire. And in order to, plug the gas leak, you need to put to stop the fire, essentially, and extinguish it. So that's what like mast cell stabilizers are. And then working on a person's like limbic system, their emotional kind of state, how safe do they feel in their body, right? How able are they to rest, that kind of thing. Within that first kind of stage too, I also think it's important to start remineralizing a person. And bringing their minerals back into balance at whatever way they tolerate. Because again, if you do not have enough minerals, you're often going to have difficulties detoxifying, and you're going to have difficulties handling the parasite issue, right?
Yeah.
So that all goes into the first kind of stage, which is the foundational work. So that's like drainage pathways, minerals, like mast cell stabilization, working on the nervous system. And there's other things that kind of go within that as well, but that is the most important thing. And that is the thing that people often can safely kind of embark on their own. Of course, talk to your doctor about it, but like, it is generally well tolerated. And that can get a person out of a really, really messed up situation. Briefly, just talking on some tools on that. So within drainage, a very important piece is binders. And binders are just unbelievably important. And could even say they are today's multivitamin just because of how toxic we are and how this can so easily take off so much stress from the essentially all we're being exposed to. It allows us to actually bind up what is floating around and causing a lot of oxidative stress and allows our body to release more of it, right? And so they're different than chelators. Chelators are more about ripping things out, and that'll cause it to kind of essentially like float around and cause stress. But binders are more about binding to it strongly, and then your body excretes that substance very easily. So there's a difference between dumb binders and intelligent binders. Dumb binders are things like perhaps charcoal, bentonite clay, diatomaceous earth. They're not very selective. They bind to a lot of nutrients. They may be good in short stints, like charcoal might be good for food poisoning and that kind of thing. But the things that are good for kind of longer term use are going to be the ones that are more selective, and that's going to be like modified citrus pectin, which is great for heavy metals. Enteris gel is like a methylated silica that's really good for healing the gut and binding aluminum. There's a really good form of zeolite that is intestinal. It's not micronized or nanonized. That's called zeobinds. That is just absolutely fantastic. It's an absolute staple. Binds to so many different things. And I mean, it could kind of go on and on, but I think those are some of the best examples I have. In terms of gut healing too, I mean, there's so many options out there, but even just working on the glyphosate piece, the fulvic humic acids, right? So like ion gut support can just really do a number on restoring a person's gut integrity and working on that foundational piece of the drainage funnel, right? So beyond that, then when a person wants to explore parasites, I think it really should be done under the guidance of a practitioner. But something to think about is that they should generally be approached large to small, because there is a odd phenomenon where the larger parasites, the mucoid plaque and the ropeworm and the roundworms and the nematodes, will often house smaller bugs within them. They may often house the mold and the fungi and the viruses and the bacteria and the mycoplasma and the spirochetes. And so if you are trying to go, for example, for people doing Lyme treatments, they try to go for the spirochetes right away. There's often a retreating of spirochetes back into the parasites. The second they stop the herbs or the antivirals or whatever, they come right back out and you go on this merry-go-round. So you want to get the big ones out first. There's a lot of great tools to do that. One that is very, very well tolerated is something called the Zen cleanse. So that's like an enzyme cleanse that is really good for clearing out a lot of ropey material from the gut. And then there's other really good tools as well for kind of going in that vein. So parasites also, I think they should be worked on for several months. I don't think they should be like full moon cleansing is interesting and maybe can help a little bit, but these parasites often have long life cycles, and to achieve like a real resolution and a quelling of whatever havoc they're causing, not only do you want to have the foundations working really well and really detoxifying and remineralizing over a longer period of time, but the parasite work should be approached over a several month time frame.
That makes a lot of sense. Would you say that in general, people who sort of go to approaching detox in these stages, but don't use binders or don't use them appropriately, would you say that that would be the main reason why they would see like an increase in symptoms that were just extremely, like just not pleasing at all? Or do you think that that can also occur when the correct binders and the correct protocol is put in place?
Like you're referring to detox and die-off reactions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very important thing because there's a lot of gaslighting happening in the
Yes.
the community. Um, yeah, sometimes it's unavoidable, the reactions, like as things die, things are going to be released. And sometimes as your immune system reboots, for example, if you're doing a good job remineralizing, sometimes that will cause a little flare-ups of reawakening to chronic infections, like an old ear infection may flare up, or like your gut may get gurgly and you kind of release something all of a sudden and then it goes away. That is all part of it because healing is really not linear. It's not a straight shot into the moon. There is this kind of little curve where your body's cleaning stuff out. But at the same time, it shouldn't be just a constant roller coaster and constant reactions. That just means you're not on the right program, and you're skipping steps, right? I work with some really, really sensitive cases that are really, really difficult, and you have to take things really, really, really slow. Um, but yeah, generally, if you've done everything correctly, like the foundational work correctly, and a person is like reacting in a cleanse, it's often because you're going too fast and you're not binding and draining enough. Because the
I see.
binding and draining still needs to go on over an extended period of time. It's really not a good idea to approach any form of detox without binders, I think. That may be, for example, an issue with like some of the niacin sauna flushing that people are doing,
Oh,
that they release so much stuff from the fats, but they took no binders and they can have some really nasty redistribution symptoms. Same thing with like some of the medical medium detoxes I've seen. And even within mineral balancing, I mean, some people are just like put people on really high doses of minerals with no drainage or mineral support, and then they have constant reactions and then they wonder why.
yeah. Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. Also, something that kind of crossed my mind as you were talking is that you can have, I've definitely experienced this, but you can have reactions like that. Even when you're addressing things like the limbic system or you're working on your nervous system, you can have what feels like regression, or even physical symptoms. I noticed, in fact, I'm sort of like dealing with it right now to a degree. I noticed that when I started addressing my nervous system, my gallbladder started to say hi to me in a
Wow.
very interesting way. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And it's not about, again, I'm not like really approaching the scenario with fear. And I am actually like I'm also supplementing accordingly because, there's discomfort there. But it was just such interesting timing that when I started to dip my toes into the dysregulation program, and sort of just like, I wasn't even doing that much. But concurrently, literally, my gallbladder just decided to be like, yo,
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. Yeah. I mean, it's just so bizarre. I mean, it's all interconnected. And I've had many experiences of just having emotional releases or, doing trauma work. And all of a sudden I pass a bug,
yeah,
something visible,
yeah,
or have some sort of metal dump, right? And you see it on a hair test.
yeah.
So yeah,
Amazing. It's so fascinating. I mean, really, we can talk about, I know you can, but it's like, it's endless, right? We can talk about it for days because there's just so much to it. And it's just, again, so incredible and fascinating how the body not just gets thrown out of balance, but the ability it has to get back into balance given the right environment and tools is the most beautiful part about it because it's just absolutely, it wants to heal. It's not, it doesn't only, it's designed to heal. And so I think just given the appropriate information, awareness, and tools and guidance, is often the ticket. And I think prayer sort of gets,
for
is
sure.
definitely in there because we need to be guided appropriately. We need to be directed appropriately. And sometimes we can take the wrong paths, which I think most of us have done to some degree. I mean, you can definitely attest to that.
For sure. I mean, it is remarkable, like what you're saying, like how can our bodies even be adapted to just this super unnatural situation we've created and still work 9 to 5 jobs and raise kids and have like relatively normal lives. Like a lot of people, it's just like, oh, some fatigue, some anxiety, that's what manifests for them, and that's about it. That's mind blowing. That's absolutely incredible. And our bodies is probably our main kind of advantage that we've had in nature, is that we're so adaptable. And so if we just create the right environment internally and externally, like our bodies will heal itself. And that is ultimately why all healing is self-healing. And if a person is able to also recalibrate that inner voice and that inner guidance system, then they can care for themselves over a long period of time. The issue is when you have been sick for so long and you also don't have access to the right tools because of all the unfortunate health censorship from the times that we live in, um, then it becomes very difficult to pull yourself out of a tough situation. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the people who I worked with along the way and the gems I took from each practitioner. So
Absolutely. Oh, well, so well said. Beautifully, beautifully said. And again, I think that's so much of what I just said a couple of minutes ago is that sometimes the way that you did, the way that I do, I mean, pray for the right people to be brought into your life because it really will happen for you, you know, and it might not be on your timeline and you might get little nuggets here and there, but there's something to be said about just, you know, trusting that things are happening for you, even when it feels like you are walking uphill, you know, in the snow naked, um, you know, being attacked at every corner. I mean, because it often in healing or in sickness, it can often feel that way. And I hate to even use the word sickness because in reality, even in sickness, the body is still healing, which is a very interesting concept for most people. Don't you agree?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even manifestations we think of as enemies, like cancer, is often like an adaptation to what it's been thrown at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I love that whole. In fact, I am going to be recording a show on cancer in the coming weeks here, and I will definitely, I think, touch on some aspects of that because I feel like it's a really important piece, you know?
Very relevant.
Yeah, so relevant. Are there any other points that you want to cover sort of before we, you know, land the plane here in terms of tools, drainage, binders, anything that you feel like we haven't touched on yet that you would like to touch on yet that's important?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for all the basic stuff, again, I just have a free guide on my website that covers like, lots of different options for that. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of tools at our disposal. There is something I think it's important to think about is this the essentially the worldwide spike protein poisoning we experienced after 2020 with either being exposed to COVID or getting vaccinated and the shedding situation. Spike protein, right, is kind of the main thing that is causing a worsening of people's condition after 2020, and there's a lot of good research to show that how toxic it is. Uh, there are tools available to us for degrading that and reducing its impact on us. One of them is melatonin, which is awesome. But there's others like dandelion, great liver herb also can degrade it. A new kid on the block, something I've been exploring more recently, is from it's a nonprofit research. It's a nonprofit research institute out of Italy. So it's zerospike.org. They came up with something called augmented NAC. So it's a special form of N-acetylcysteine that they have run some studies to show that it is, I think, something like 8 to 10 times more effective for degrading spike protein than regular NAC. So that is another thing to talk about. And actually circling back to what are the things most people are being exposed to, the spike protein toxicity is one of them for sure, and something that should be kind of thought about. So
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up because we were talking about that, and you know, I'm so glad that you brought that up and you reminded me because I think it is, you know, I feel like look, it's been all the talk, but I feel like it's sort of simmered down in a way because we're moving on to different problems and there's other things happening in life, and it's like now we're almost talking about the COVID era as the past, which I actually think it's not the past, and I don't mean, you know, people are quote unquote like, oh, we have to be afraid of COVID. Not that we ever needed to be afraid, but I'm saying um, that's again, I hope that no one takes offense to that because I understand a lot of people suffered a great deal, but
yeah,
the fear was so unnecessary and perpetuated. And that's another podcast episode. But there's so much fallout from 2020 post. We are seeing now there's so much, it's like it's a disaster zone, right?
yeah,
And there's still so much, it's still very prevalent. It just looks differently, right?
yeah, yeah. A good maybe I don't know 30 to 40% of my client population had a worsening in their condition after 2020.
Yeah.
So why is that? I mean, is it the virus? Was it the implementation of 5G? I mean, probably a mixture of things, but yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there has to be some element of the spike protein that is absolutely there. I just, put it this way. I've had enough conversations with my own practitioner to know, and he uses he's very good in applied kinesiology and so forth. And the amount of people coming in that were testing high as, with spike protein and the kind of symptoms that he was seeing and the things that he was implementing, super interesting, like just high levels of enzymes and things like that to
Mhm.
sort of like neutralize that. And I was personally doing that too, like around the time where, a lot of the boosters were coming out and you were
Yeah.
around a lot of people. I mean, I was like eating enzymes like candy almost because I knew that, and again, this is not medical advice, but I just knew enough about the enzyme discussion to know that like there could be some positive implications from enzyme therapy, but there it can't not be a topic of conversation, and especially if we saw so many people who had a regression or some people had things that they were dealing with and it became exponentially worse. There's just way too much evidence, I feel, to negate that part of the discussion, the spike protein thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the
Yeah.
results with people who you detoxify spike protein from as well, they kind of speak for itself. Yeah,
Exactly.
speak for themselves.
Exactly. I mean, the proof is sort of in the pudding. You don't really have to like even defend it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I could,
it's a really, not to cut you off, it's just a really good topic that, to be brought up and to think about, again, to think about, to bring awareness to.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, last thoughts before we share with our audience where they can learn more about you and find you, and if they are looking to work with you. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with, myself included? Because I do feel like, there's just endless wisdom that comes from your camp. I've just enjoyed this so very much. And I know that there's probably a lot more to say, but if someone's listening or they're feeling like they've been stuck for a long time or they've been in a tough position or they have a family member or a friend that's been in a tough position, what would you say to them or what would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, it's loaded. It's hard to just say like one thing. I mean, I just circle back to what I said at the very beginning, what we were talking about. So just persistence and faith, I think, are two of the most valuable things right now. There are so many tools out there. There's so many practitioners doing some amazing work, and you just have to really search for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said and simple, I mean, yes, it's complex, but when you really dial it down, I think it's simpler than we think. And sometimes we can overcomplicate things. And I mean, I know it just as much as you, and I'm sure so many people listening know it as well. But these trials, they can be the most frustrating part of your life to some degree. And for me, I never anticipated, as say going back to my teenage years, I never anticipated that I would be in the position that I'm in, or that I had seen in the past so much suffering and still not out of that arena, right? Like still very much working through a lot of things. I've had a lot of quote unquote roadblocks. And I say quotes because are they really roadblocks or is it just information that's helping us propel to the next level and really an elevation that we like in your case, like you were so hopeless at one point and you said it earlier, you're living a life that you didn't even think was possible, and that can very well be someone else's story. So I just think that there's so much purpose to pain, and I understand that it's so cliche and it can feel almost like a gaslighting thing when you're in it, but it's not, because as we have to acknowledge the pain, we have to validate the pain and the struggle, but at the same time we have to look at the other side of the coin, because that other side of the coin matters so much, and it's often what gives us the strength to move forward and creates the resiliency that we need to get to a healthier place in life. So it's people
So
like you that have made a huge difference, that just open the door for people to think about these things, that there's different perspectives and different ways, and that healing is possible. So, just from my heart, I want to thank you because, again, listening to you on Matt's podcast, I just was so, and I told him, I had a conversation with him about just how impressed I was with the conversation that you guys had. I loved it so much. And so to be able to have an additional conversation with you, it's really been such a joy.
it's been a great joy as well. I mean, we have very like-minded view on things. So, both on this podcast and our own conversation, it's been really great. Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, people don't really realize what they're missing. What the normal is not really normal for humans, and something to really contemplate is like, what is the full capacity of the human experience if we were unburdened by all the toxins and all the parasites and all the nutrient deficiencies? I will say that detoxification has been a profound awakening for me, an awakening of all my senses, an awakening of my connection to myself and to the world, and how I show up to the world, and my connection to others, and how I express myself, how I express myself creatively. All that has been thoroughly, essentially unlocked by a really deep detox. And that's just been my story. So yeah, I hope other people can experience that as well.
Yeah, it just the amount of doors that can open. I think we don't even really have a clue until we're there and we experience it like you did, you know. And so it is really fascinating. Again, it goes back to the capacity. Sometimes we don't even really understand at the level of capacity that we're operating in or on, and it's often much lower than what we're capable of, you know. And it's just it's possible to get to that elevated level, you know, as we just heard with you. So it's just amazing, and it's very hopeful. So I hope that, you know, if anything, people will walk away from this conversation just having you know, maybe a renewed hope, and maybe a little bit of strength, mentally and emotionally and spiritually, as they're walking their own path. So, yeah, it's been
Beautiful.
a beautiful conversation. Where can people, Kyle, learn more about you? Where are you on social media, your website, and so forth? Please give us the details, because I know people are going to want them.
Thank you. So I am active really just on Instagram, social media wise. So that's Kyle, Kyle underscore Peche, Peche. I'm just kind of keeping people up to date with stuff I'm doing, or posting little clips or whatnot. But yeah, most of my work, and really all my work, is on my website. That's jyotimineralbalancing.com. So that's JYOTI mineralbalancing.com. You can also just do JyotiMB.com. It'll take you there. I have, lots of articles that are well researched, at least I think so, and a free guide, and then other podcast episodes I've done, and all sorts of kind of resources for people. So
Awesome. Awesome. Amazing. And my friends, like always, I will have this information listed in the show notes for you. So if you can't find anything, make sure that you reach out to me or Kyle, and we can point you in the right direction. Again, my friend, it has been a pleasure having this conversation. I am just so thrilled, and I cannot wait to share it with our friends. So thank you again for being here. It's been an honor, and I hope that you guys have a blessed day. Until the next episode, I will see you later.